Now, let me bring in Steve Kuncewicz, who is a defamation lawyer, specialises in online social media trolling. Hello, Steve.
Good evening, Stephen.
Hiya. So that's some of the background, and it got to the stage where I'd had enough. And yet I didn't know who this guy was because, of course, he was operating behind an anonymous account. So I started tracking him down. I was successful in tracking him down. I sent one of my people, if you like, to his door to hand over the legal documentation to him. He instantly crumbled. And just this week, he has paid me a 6-figure sum in damages, plus the legal costs on top. And I just think this is a good opportunity, Steve. It's got a lot of press, this story. I think it's because of the level of damages. But I think to myself, Steve, if you can't afford, I had a brilliant lawyer, a guy called Paul Tweed, international reputation as a libel lawyer, and I had the investigative skills that I've learnt over the last couple of decades doing the job I do. How does an ordinary punter that doesn't have all of that experience, or somebody that doesn't have a lot of money, how do they protect themselves in the wild west of the internet, Steve?
Well, that's a really good question, Stephen. I think you managed to get yourself an extremely good lawyer, and you put your own skills into this process, and you were able to get yourself a result, and you were willing. And I think you probably felt you had to invest to deal with some of these terrible slurs that are made to your reputation. But not everybody finds themselves in that situation. I think the sad reality is that any kind of civil claim, any kind of legal redress is very often a rich man's pursuit unless you can get a lawyer to take this on a no-win, no-fee agreement. And that's more common, but it's certainly not, the option for everybody. There are difficulties. You were able to find out who you were chasing. Sometimes these people are genuinely anonymous, and you may have to try and get yourself a court order, sometimes out of the jurisdiction from the platforms in question to unmask these people. And more often than not, I think, although your other guests may say different, it's hard to get the police interested in something like this because more often it's an attack on your reputation as opposed to a direct threat of violence or using a platform to spread indecent, obscene or menacing content. So the first port of call for many people, I think, is going to be contacting the platforms themselves. But as we've seen, more often
my experience is they're useless. My experience is they are absolutely indifferent. If you are getting bombarded with abuse, they do not care, is my experience.
And that's a fair point, because we're now on the run-up to what the UK describes as the first attempt to regulate social media. And there isn't any, obviously, worldwide regulation of social media that's meant to deter their users from harm. But specifically, it doesn't deter their users from these kind of allegations. So if the platforms aren't going to help you, and if the police aren't necessarily in the position to help you, then it's really, really tough. And I think we're in a really interesting time at the minute where this is still a medium where the users are getting used to the effect that their comments have on other people, and maybe don't appreciate that it can be a permanent stain on their reputation, but also don't appreciate that social media has a long memory and can, if you've got the resources and are willing to do so, be used to track people down.
Why are the social media platforms not liable to a defamation suit? Why can they not be sued if they're hosting it?
They can be in certain circumstances, but there are a number of defences available to them as well, which say that they're not responsible necessarily for the content they use online. It's set out in terms of use. It's set out in a number of acts of Parliament, European law, UK law as well. And their, I think, position is more often than not that they're just a conduit. They provide a service and they're not responsible for the activity of their users. Once they're put on notice, that becomes a little bit different, because one of the orders that you might try and get from one of the platforms is to identify who's behind an anonymous account on the basis that, as a platform, they're kind of bound up in this negative activity. But they will say that they can't police everyone, that free speech has got to be allowed to still be a thing on the web. And that's what we're seeing in the debate around this new online safety legislation, is that it's a really difficult balancing act between fair free speech and the kind of horrible defamatory content that you come up against.